Mr. Courtney for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as you said in your opening remarks, obviously we've got a budget that's coming out in May, which the content of this hearing is going to be very helpful. In addition to that, we're also looking at another Quadrennial Defense review that is beginning the process right now. In the last review, the number of attack submarines that was pegged was 48, and I just was wondering whether the witnesses had any opinions about whether or not that number should change, stay the same. Mr. O'Rourke's report mentioned that there's some discussion about reducing the fleet size down to 40. So obviously this issue is going to be swirling around out there, and maybe starting with you, Mr. Thompson, and going across.
Congressman, I believe that on the glide path we're actually headed for not more than about 41 circa 2028. Electric Boat built those Los Angeles class attack subs so efficiently back in the 70s and 80s that they all retire very quickly going into the next 2 decades, and that has the consequence of reducing our subnumbers, our attack subnumbers, well below 48. You know, we skipped 6 years in the 1990s with no construction. I guess that was the switch over from Seawolf to what we now call the Virginia class. And then we delayed ramping up the construction of the Virginia class. It's not until 2011 that we get to 2 a year. I'm not sure we're ever going to build them at 3 a year. So although the lowest number I've heard the Joint Staff say was prudent was 48, we're actually headed for a considerably lower number. At the very least, we have to produce 2 a year, but anybody who suggests doing anything less than that is really putting our intelligence gathering capabilities and our undersea warfare capabilities at risk.
When I retired from active duty, the number was 75 plus or minus a couple. That's still my favorite number, so that you can take that one and put it wherever it deserves to be. I said in my opening remarks that, to me, the most important thing is what's already been accomplished, and that is the multi-year capability. We all know those submarines are terribly expensive. They, too, take a lot of time to build. And with that multi-year procurement and a level of 2 a year, you never get to a number a submariner likes or even a strategic thinker likes. But all of these things have to be considered in the same light that you all look at them. There's a whole Navy here, not just a submarine Navy. You are all more than well aware of the issues involved with procurement if the numbers drop too low. Not only do you start paying way too much money for things, but in some cases you have problems getting them at all. And given that all of our nuclear shipbuilding is wrapped up in 2 classes of ships, the amount of business that we do is pretty limited. So I think that it's good to have a number, and it's good for these studies to continue, and they never stop. They're done by friends, they're done by foes, depending on what your definition of either is, and they do illuminate the issues and bring them up to date. But I think we kind of are where we are. And if we have the ability to sustain 2 a year, then we can argue about a lot of other things. We've got a new class of ships we're going to have to eventually build. That's going to be another big challenge for you all as well as for the Navy and strategic thinkers. It is just going to get tougher and tougher. And to me, I like where we are, not because it gets us to the right number of submarines, but it provides a line of defense for the moment at least, which I'm sure will be reviewed.
I'm generally comfortable with the glide path that we're currently on. I don't have a real problem with us going from 48 to the low 40s. 2 things I like to cite. Historically, the utility of submarines in my mind has decreased fairly dramatically over the last 6 decades. There hasn't been a major submarine battle since the Second World War. There's been 5 torpedoes fired and 2 incidences in the last 6+ decades. Yes, we're seeing certain countries in an anti-access strategy reach for cheap asymmetrical capabilities in terms of diesel submarines. If we're really worried about that, my answer is not to come up with a highly technological answer for that. My answer is simply to symmetricize the situation and for us to get in the business of building simple, cheap diesel submarines and meeting that threat head on if we really seriously consider that a big threat. And whenever I hear surveillance issues, underwater capabilities of submarines, I tend to think that's overvalued. I don't see that much utility in building submarines for surveillance reasons.
Could I comment on that? I think the problem the undersea warfare community has is that much of what it does is not in the public domain. And so we are left guessing about precisely how the submarines are being used. The fact of the matter is that most of the mission days are spent on intelligence gathering. And that doesn't necessarily mean looking for submarines. It also means doing signals intelligence collection for long periods of time, covertly off the coast of places like Syria, China, Iran, and so on. Now, the Navy's never going to talk about that in public, but to suggest that the reason why we can safely go to the low 40s is because we don't use a lot of torpedoes anymore is kind of missing the point about why we buy submarines in the first place.
Again, my follow would be that there's a tendency to sell the secrecy argument and the value of what we get from that intelligence gathering. I think the question has to be asked whether we need $2 billion undersea platforms to gather that intelligence, or whether there are other means that are equally applicable that give us a larger array of capabilities over the long term.
I guess the next step is to cut the number of imagery satellites and signals intelligence satellites we have too, since those are secret also.
No. It's a question of balancing between those two. I'd much rather see my money go into that kind of capability than buying submarines.
We gave the chairman of readiness, out of respect, a bit more than 5 minutes, but you're fairly new here. We can't do that.
If I could add
Gentleman from California, Mr. Hunter.